Hey everybody, Mike with Games Played Badly, and today on Session 0 I have Brian and Zach. You may remember Brian from a previous video regarding a game that he collaborated on called Rackham Vale. Well, he's back with Zach and they're working on something very exciting. Are you familiar with Greg Broadmore? Greg has been working with Weta Workshop since 2002 on such projects as Lord of the Rings. Greg is also writing his own project, based off the designs that he had for some retro ray guns, called The World of Dr. Groardbort, a self-professed satirization of 1890s to 1940s science fiction. Brian and Zach are directly collaborating with Greg and Weta Workshop to bring the world of Dr. Groardbort to this D&D 5e setting. Check out this video. You'll also be hearing part of the soundtrack that they designed for the game during this interview today. You heard some of it in the clip before, but you'll be hearing it throughout the video as we talk. I also want to thank Matt over at Gemmed Firefly for all these amazing t-shirts that he designs and I wear on my shows. If you'd like one of these or something different, make sure to go up to gemmedfirefly.com, take a look around, pick what you want, and at checkout, use our discount code BADLY15. BADLY 15 at checkout for 15% off your order. Brian, Zach, and the world of Dr. Groardbort is right around the corner. That interview starts now. Zach and Brian, how are you?
Good.
Hey, Mike. Good to see you.
Good to see you again. Zach, it's our first time meeting, but Brian's an old hat at this. He's already been on once.
I know, and I was really excited to come on and meet you, Mike, and talk about Dr. G, so thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, I don't know what it is with game creators and making names so long it's impossible for me to pronounce them. So I'm going to let you introduce your project. What is it called?
Well, it's called Dr. Groardbort's Scientific Adventure Violence, and it's based off of the comic series, and the latest one is called Dr. Groardbort's Infallible Aether Oscillators. So,
wow.
Well, that's the series called. The last book that was released was Onslaught, which is sort of the collection of all the comics.
We are talking about a game that is based off, again, just to recap, Brian was on with Craig about their production called Rackham Vale, based off of Arthur Rackham's amazing artwork. And that has been released and been re-released in a hardcover book, which I just got, and it's fabulous. This one is based off of a universe created by Greg Broadmore. And Greg Broadmore is with Weta Workshop. So if you're not familiar with that, why don't you catch us up on to who this amazing legendary luminary is?
Well, Greg is an artist and director and writer for Weta Workshop, which is a big special effects movie studio primarily. They did all of the practical effects for Lord of the Rings, and it was the effects house was actually co-founded by Peter Jackson. And this, right now, they do lots of movie stuff, but Greg, in addition to his work doing movie effects, he was the lead concept designer on District 9 and Chappie, I think, and a whole bunch of other their movie projects. But he also created this comic series called Dr. Groardbort, and it's kind of like Tolkien in a way, and where you hear that Tolkien created these languages, the Elven languages and the Dwarven languages and all of those things first. he was a linguist, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and he created those languages and then created a world in which those languages should live. And that's how Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth and all those things were born. In a way, similarly, and I don't think Greg would object to characterizing it this way, it started with Greg making these ray guns. He was making these fabulous, not steampunk, but these fabulous gadgets and ray guns and resembling blunderbusses and all of that. And he had a whole collection of them, and Weta was selling them. And in the creating of that and the catalogs for them, it became, stories emerged. So the world emerged from those ray guns, and that world took the shape of comic books. There've been a few that have been released by Titan Comics, and a couple of other projects, like there was a big video game for Magic Leap, and there was an international art exhibition that toured, all featuring these ray guns and then the characters that emerged in the universe. And so that's how the Dr. Groardbort was born. And it's a euphemism in a way. It's our world, but it's our world if things had gone much differently 100 years ago, where it's turn of the century and 1920s, except World War I never happened because there was something called the Consolidation Wars, in which the British Empire, bolstered by the technological breakthroughs of this one inventor named Dr. Groardbort, actually rules the world. And furthermore, the cosmos. Well, not the cosmos, but they've started forays into the near solar system. And that's the world in which all these stories take place. It's the British Empire and the Church of that didn't decline, that actually went on to build rocket ships and go carry on their colonization effort on Venus, Mars, and the moon.
That's very interesting, especially in this day and age. You get a lot of that Nippon tech. Japan kind of takes over everything, and those sensibilities kind of pervade a world. Now you have a different world power who's done basically the exact same thing.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it's very much, the world itself is very satirical in nature. So is the supplement and setting that we've written. It's very much a send-up of British colonialism, not a celebration of it in any way. So the British Empire's hegemony and their imperialist nature is all generally a very negative thing, as it was mostly in our world. So it's one thing that I think is a bit different about this setting and supplement, at least in terms of 5e, in that it is very self-referential, it's satirical, and it deals with some very tricky subjects like colonialism and sexism and all these other things that actually took place in the 1920s and, you know, sadly are kind of still taking place. But instead of removing those things from this universe, Greg kept them in and lampoons them, skewers them mercilessly. So that was part of what we tried to carry over into this game or this setting, is that sensibility that these things exist in the world. They're not good things. They're not meant to be celebrated. They're meant to be exaggerated so that they can be held up for ridicule.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. So, Zach, from the standpoint of the game creation, what did you find the most difficult?
Well, this world distinctly, it specifically has no magic in it. So we're working with 5e rule set and had to integrate magic into a world of science. And so what we found is that we have, you know, in this world and all these, Greg has created all of these technological wonders, these devices that are cataloged and distributed around the world through, you know, a sort of military industrial complex. And these gadgets can perform marvelous effects. And so we found, I think, a pretty workable, practical solution that, you know, fits into the world logic pretty seamlessly, in that the magic of 5e could be mapped to the different sorts of technologies that exist in this world. And so if you want to cast fireball, you have you know, ray guns that are special, like that specialize in fire-based marvelous effects. And so you need to, if you're a wizard, now you're a boffin, right? And you need to be able to wield these gadgets of expertise in order to cast your fireball. And so that concept works across all of the classes of 5e, and it adds a bit of challenge to the players, because now we've essentially replaced all of the components of 5e with new components. And so that really is the only real mechanical change. It's just that, well, you don't need pixie dust and, you know, to say a few specific words in order to cast something, you need to have the Gadatronic, you need to be able to pull the trigger and or like, adjust the gauges on it in order to actually cast the spell. And so that was, at first we were a little daunted by it because we had some different proposals for Greg, and he's like, absolutely, there's no magic in this world. Everything needs to be explained in a mundane, scientific way. And I like that because, like Brian was saying, sort of this is the real world. There are scientific breakthroughs that have, expanded the possibilities of humankind, but that is the world logic we're working with. And so I do think we've created something there that fits into it with 5e. It's going to be familiar to 5e players. So they're, it's not like we've revamped 5e system. It's been skinned to something they already know.
Mhm.
And it's also opened up some opportunities, some great opportunities, I think, in terms of, like, if you read the source material, it's so explosive. Like the gadgets that exist there and the ray guns that exist don't really work properly half the time. They explode in the characters' faces. It's really a dangerous sort of pursuit, is working with these aether oscillators and channeling phlogiston through different devices. And so that also gave us an opportunity to bleed in some old school kind of concepts like fumble tables into these gadgets. That doesn't really exist really in the 5e rule set. Mm-hmm. And so now, if you're firing off ray waves, or you're casting mirror image through a piece of technology that warps the atmosphere, it can go horribly wrong, right? And it can and we kind of went a little wild with what can happen. It can like spray hot tea in your face. It can explode completely. It can go haywire and have a mind of its own. So there's all these different challenges that go into, I think, that go into the actual use of magic, that 5e players, that will be a really new experience for a lot of 5e players, I think. And I think it'll be something fun and true to source material.
Right. It'll be a newer experience for 5e players, but for a lot of us old timers, and I hate to use this because I know I'm going to get a bunch of blowback, but for a lot of us who used to play back in the day in what would be considered like OSE, fumble tables, I use those. Those are right out of Dragon magazine. So
yeah, exactly. So we're hoping that it will maybe bring some of the old school crew and make them want to give 5e a shot if they weren't interested in 5e, and at the same time it might open the eyes of some 5e players who haven't really tried the old school style of gaming too. So I think we're hitting a middle ground there that we think should be interesting to everybody.
So one of the things that I caught when you were talking was you said Greg says. So is Greg directly involved with this project?
Yeah, and actually, Mike, I should have said this at first, but apologize to your viewers for me being in a loud environment. I'm having internet issues, so I had to scramble out to a cafe. So if you're still watching and are annoyed by the ambient noise on my end, it's not like I just decided, yeah, I'll take this call from a cafe. Believe me, I'm more annoyed than you are. So, yeah, Greg has been really since the get-go. I mean, the way this started is I came across these books that I bought back in 2014 that went into storage for years, and when I got a hold of them again, I got them out and remembered. I'd kind of forgotten about them. Oh my gosh, I love this stuff. This would be so good for either a role-playing game or a setting for an existing role-playing game rule set. And I just found his email address and emailed him, and he wrote me back the next day. And this is just completely blind, total cold call. Just, hey, I'm just some dude who likes your stuff and wants to make a role-playing game. And he was like, great, let's do it. So
that's awesome.
He's been as he and the team at Weta have been as easy and fun to work with as any licensor I've ever worked with. They're responsive. They're incredibly supportive. Whatever we need, and in terms of input in the game, Greg has been. I mean, basically, whenever we reach a crossroads, as we were designing things, and we say, well, we could go this way with it or this way with it, we refer to Greg, and we present him both options. Zach mentioned one key one, which was when we came up against the magic barrier, like, do we make some magic in the world, or are there gods? Is there whatever? And so we sent that to Greg, and he came back with a definitive answer. but also long explanations and lots more ideas for think about it this way, or what if this happened. And so he's been incredibly easy to work with, really not only fast, which is important for when you're a licensee, but also just always open to our ideas. The comics, there were only a handful of comics, and then there are the ray guns, and that's kind of all there is to this. Well, and there are some other bits and bobs here and there, but there was a lot of fleshing out we had to do. There were some things that are just mentioned in the comics, and we went and created a whole species or planet from that. I mean, Mars is only mentioned, and now it's a full playable thing. So there was a lot that we had to invent. And he was always incredibly supportive with that. And I say incredibly, I don't use that blithely. I mean, like I was amazed at how much he was allowing us to riff on his original ideas.
Right.
Some artists are like, "This is my baby. You can't." He loves almost everything that we've done, and anything he doesn't love, he gives us feedback about. Well, it's not quite the idea that I was going for with that I had in mind for Mars. What if it was kind of this? And it's usually better that way. So we're like, okay, great, and we go and do it. So he's been, I would say, the perfect amount of involved when it comes to a licensor. He's there when we need him and provides us exactly what we need, but he lets us get on with it and create and doesn't hinder that process. And he's also just, he's just a lot of fun. He's just a great guy to work with. He's incredibly switched on and sharp, and always has good ideas to throw in the mix.
I'm just stunned. I mean, you're working with the Weta Workshop. It's yeah. Anyway, you're lucky sons of guns. Just remember that. Don't ever take your eye off that prize. So
I've worked with enough licensors to know that this isn't normal, and to never take it for granted that we're just incredibly fortunate to have such a supportive team behind us. Same goes with Exalted Funeral. I mean, I knew I needed a publisher for this. I didn't want to just do this myself like I did with Drac and Veil. I wanted an actual publisher behind it. And Exalted Funeral was immediately interested, and they've been involved on all the calls with Weta, and have also been exactly what we need from a publisher, like giving us what we need, but letting us get on with the creative side of it.
I'm super happy about all that. I'm personally stunned, but I think it's fantastic. And then also on top of that, we're not just talking about a terrestrial setting.
Yeah, it's very much, a lot happens in space. So canonically, at this point in time, Earth has expanded for the British Empire has expanded to the moon first, then to Mars, and then to Venus. And they've faced kind of increasing resistance. Very little on the moon, very little actually on Mars. Venus has been a whole different ball of wax. The Venusians Venus is a much tougher nut to crack for the Empire. They don't just lay down and surrender. And the Moonlings are still fighting back, and the Martians have their own issues, but there's a contingent that are still fighting. So yeah, it takes place across all of those worlds. Those are the kind of four big settings, but there's everything else too. There's an entire species, several out on the Kuiper Belt. There are extragalactic species. I mean, it's wide open in terms of where things can come from and what you can do if you get your hands on a rocket and go blasting off. But the four major settings are Earth, Moon, Venus, and Mars. But what we hope is to expand those into other settings later on. In terms of the Spelljammer comparison, I think obviously the fact that they both take place in or have the ability to go off into space is certainly similarity, but
that's probably where the similarities end.
They kind of end there in a way, yeah. I mean, whereas Spelljammer, which I love as a setting, I'm old school like you, Mike, so I remember when that came out. It's very much planar fantasy, it's swords in space kind of stuff for the most part. And this is sci-fi. This is pulp sci-fi. This is inspired by Greg's love of old Buck Rogers and old Flash Gordon stuff. We don't use the L word, so it's ray guns. It's not L guns. That's a directive directly from Greg. He's like, that word is not used in this setting, but it's very much rockets and gadgets and weird new technologies just being discovered, and the atomic age is on the way, but not yet here. So it's very scientifically focused, which is not what I would say Spelljammer is. Spelljammer is still very much fantasy and magic. This is everything is as Zach said, routed through gadgets, and there are tanks and airships and dirigibles and rockets, obviously. So comparisons, I think, are are
Space,
in
and
terms
that's
of
about it.
that size, pretty much. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
right.
that's setting aside the thematic differences, which again, this is going to have a very different feel, I think, in terms of it's the historical roots and the satire that you'll recognize things from our world here, in which there's not much in Spelljammer that is reflective of history. I wouldn't say in the way that this is. So I don't know, Zach, would you agree with that comparison?
Yeah, no, it's I don't have a lot to add to that really. I think we really have, it's just not fantasy. I think it's like
Right.
what Brian was saying, there's not really a lot of fantasy elements in it at all.
I like the comparison to Buck Rogers and like the Lost in Spaces of the world and things like that. Just like kind of that old retro sci-fi feel.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, 100%.
So you guys are launching in just a few days. How long has this been in development?
Good question. Let's see. Probably about a year and a half since that first contact with Greg and Weta, and then brought Exalted Funeral on board, and then and the deal was done very quickly because they were so easy to work with, and so excited that we wanted to work on this. So I think we actual hardcore development, probably what we're about 7-8 months in. Zach, does that sound right?
Yeah, I feel like we started working on the quick start. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, we did something insane. We decided we wanted to release a quick start module for this. So, just get it out there, release it for free, and let people get familiar with this. And you'll remember from Rack and Bale, that was supposed to be a 40-page zine. It turned into a 150-page book because apparently I can't manage to not go overboard with anything. Well, we did the same thing for Dr. G. This quick start turned into 150-page sandbox settings, basically, on Venus. And it was so big, we realized there's nothing quick about this. So we broke it into 5 different quick start releases, which we've released one every month leading up to the campaign. The 5th and final one came out last week through Dicebreakers. So we ended up writing and creating a ton of stuff just for the quick start. I don't know, we got carried away because the setting's so much fun.
I mean, it's easy to get carried away in this setting. It's really, there's so much to work with.
It's almost off-brand if you don't. Because
right.
Yeah.
It's so over the top and exaggerated and all that. So there are 5 quick start adventure paths basically floating around out there on the internet for free that people can try out. I think you have the first one, which includes all of the kind of rules and stuff that you need to run it. But each of the subsequent releases contains an additional adventure path and which is a module basically, and additional pre-generated characters. So there are 11 total classes, 12 actually, and so each of the quick starts contained a new one or more new classes so that people can get familiar with. What does a bard look like in this setting? What does a druid look like? And
well, then also I would imagine there was probably some custom classes that you came out with as well.
Well, it kind of. I mean, basically we took all of the 5e classes and adapted it. So that's what's in the final book. They're all 12 of those classes that you know and love from 5e. They're in here. However, they are adapted for the setting, and that adaptation takes on a couple of different. It can look much different from class to class. So some are pretty simple reskins. I mean, fighter, ranger, those are pretty simple reskins. If you know how to play those characters, that class in 5e, you'll know how to do this. You don't have to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. There are some though that will look much more customized, as you said, like the bard, the druid, the paladin to some extent. All of them have new Dr. G names. I mean, the bard is called an immediate, the druid is called an anomaly, clerics are called evangelical engineers. So some of them, there's a handful, about 3 or 4 that are more than reskins, that really are kind of overhauls of how that class works and what they do. So if you're used to playing 5e and want to just get up and blasting with your ray weapon quickly, you've got about 7 or 8 options that are just simple reskins. But if you want to try something a little bit different that feels more customized, you've got about 3 or 4 that are significantly different in terms of how they work mechanically, but also thematically.
Yeah, very good. So you have a Kickstarter coming out, and that's coming out really, really soon. What is going to be included with that?
So the book, of course, and for day 1 and day 2 backers, there's a pretty cool exclusive or incentives. One of which is a custom Dr. G, that is, we're calling it the malfunction dice tray. So as Zach mentioned, every you fumble a roll, or not just a fumble, it's not just a one. Each piece of equipment has its own malfunction gauge, and it's a threshold. It's a range of numbers that if you roll that, you've suffered a malfunction. So the highest quality equipment is just a 1. Some of the wonkier, older model stuff, or the knockoff versions, it can be roll a 1 to 2 or a 1 to 3. Anything above 1 to 3, and it's some seriously wonky equipment. But every time you roll within that malfunction gauge, then you've got to roll on the related malfunction table. So this dice tray, which features art of a ray gun blowing up and the main character from the setting space, is styled as that. This is, you roll your malfunction, and then it's scientifically proven to reduce the severity of malfunctions if you roll your dice in this tray. So that looks cool. And then the other day 1, day 2 exclusive is an enamel pin with the Dr. Groardbort ray gun logo on it. And we've actually, it's a real world analog for an in-game item, which is a catastrophic converter, which if you have it in-game, it lowers your malfunction gauge. So those two things are day 1, day 2 exclusives, but there's also a bunch of add-ons. We've got a Crash and Burn t-shirt, which features a rocket crashed and a guy off exploring. That's as an add-on. We have a secondary enamel pin that's an all bronze finish on it. We have I think one of the coolest things is you can actually get the omnibus comic called Onslaught, which is that's the canon. That's the world canon right there. So it contains all of the comics, all the Dr. G comics, all of the weapon catalogs, all of the stuff that Greg initially wrote and illustrated, and that was published by Titan Comics several years ago. And so you can actually add that on, or get a bundle where it's included, so that you can pair that role-playing game with the actual canonical material. So we've got a bunch of fun stretch goals too. The first one is soundtrack, which is awesome. Like, the music is amazing. So if we hit that stretch goal, then we'll release that for free to everybody.
That's such a cool way to start off the Kickstarter with some of those unique items. And then the stretch goals sound like a lot of... I'm going to have links down below to all the quick start stuff. This is like my third take trying to do this. And also, you can go ahead and download that stuff, play for free, figure out if this is something you really want to look into, or it can wet your whistle for the actual release. Well, I can't say how much I appreciate you both coming on. It has been awesome to talk to you, and I can't wait to see everything released. And maybe, if we're lucky enough, you'll be hearing the music soundtrack during one of our interviews. I don't know. We'll see. But thank you again for both coming on, and I appreciate it, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks so much for having us, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Hi, Greg. Greg, awesome stuff. Call me. No. Anyway, thanks. I'll talk to you guys soon.